Welcome, everyone, to another installment of AFF CMY's pre-conference interview series. I am Shemin Vizzi. Barb Clark has been a great resource to the coalition due to her passion for educating the community on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Let's see what she's going to be discussing at this year's conference. Welcome again, everyone, to our next interview with the next workshop presenter. Why don't you take a second, introduce who you are and how you are connected to adoption and foster care.
My name is Barb Clark, and I am coming to you right now from Minnesota. I work at the North American Council on Adoptable Children. NACAC is the way you say our acronym. And we are based in Minnesota, but we work all over the US and Canada, and we do a lot of advocacy and support and training and education around issues in foster care, adoption, kinship kind of world, child professionals with families, parents, caregivers, as well as child welfare professionals. And I am an adoptive parent. I have 4 young adult kids, and I am our training specialist at NACAC. So I do a lot of training around North America on topics that impact our families.
Okay, I know that one of the topics that you train on, correct me if I'm wrong, is fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Now,
Correct.
I see in your bio that it took a second to kind of get where you are, and I see that you got a degree in youth studies, but how did that get you to be educating the community on the fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and then working for NACAC for it? So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, so, my first career that I absolutely loved was working with at-risk youth and doing youth work and that kind of stuff. And I loved it. I was so passionate about it. Never thought I would find anything else I wanted to do that I enjoyed as much as that. But when we started our family, well over 20 years ago, through adoption, and I didn't work full time for quite a while. And eventually, as our kids were getting a little bit older and we were having some struggles, let's just say, with some behaviors and different things, and kind of what I realized and started to learn slowly, it took me a while to figure this out, is that I really didn't know what the heck I was doing. And so I thought, my husband and I kind of went into parenting thinking, hey, we're smart, we're educated, we got a good support system, like we can do this, bam, what's the matter? Everybody that we know says this is so hard and it'll be just great. And, that was kind of my jam, was youth development and understanding kids and that kind of stuff. And then as our kids started getting older and none of the strategies we were using were working with several of them, one in particular. And then everything that I was reading in books was not helpful. The things the professionals were telling me, medical doctors, mental health professionals, education professionals, would give me all of these well-intentioned suggestions. And of course, their favorite one was always, sticker charts and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't working. And we were really in crisis and in chaos, and things were not going very smoothly. And so I think my oldest daughter was 6 at this time. So they were 6, 5, 4, and 3. And started just digging deeper and eventually figured out that she had a fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And so she was diagnosed with that when she was 6, but it still took, even after she had the diagnosis, we were still getting, advice that was not helpful, let's just say, and did not work, and really was just causing more levels of trauma actually to our kids and both of us parents, even my husband and I. And so eventually, I was just digging and digging for years, trying to learn more. And as I did finally dig into this more, I realized we needed to completely do things differently. And then by the time we had a better grasp of it, and this is one of those things I always say, this journey, I think parenting of any kids with, trauma or no trauma, adoption or not adopted, foster care, not, it's a journey that you don't ever really get to the end. I feel like you're always trying to figure out what you should do better or what you could do differently, right? But as I started to realize that we had been doing so much stuff in ways that were not helpful to our kids, and we started doing it differently. And then, we sometimes as parents, we can get stuck in regret land, right? And just feeling guilty for the mistakes that we made and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't want to get stuck in that, quicksand. And so I just realized I became very passionate about trying to help other families and other parents and caregivers to not kind of fall into the same trap that we had fallen into, and to not make as many of the same mistakes for maybe as long as we made them, right? Like sometimes when I do training, people will be like, I've been doing foster care for 40 years and nobody's ever told me some of this. And I'm like, wow, that sucks. But now so let's just move forward. So it's just made me really passionate about sharing this information.
I do have to say from a perspective of where I live in New York on Long Island, the resources for FASD is there isn't any. There isn't any. So this is a unfortunate topic that we have to speak about, but there is so much we need to learn, because I do see that you talk about the fact that it's misdiagnosed quite extensively. It's missed all the time.
Yes.
No one knows anything. No one wants to admit to it. What do you feel you're going to be? So obviously this is the topic you'll be speaking about. So what kind of things are you going to be talking about at the conference in order for families to learn from you there?
Yeah, so what I really like to do, I think some of the important things is to really obviously in the time we have, we can't get super in depth, but to get a little bit in depth into how the alcohol exposure has impacted the brain and why some of the behaviors that are common for kids who have an FASD, whether it's diagnosed or just suspected, where those behaviors are coming from, and to try to help families, caregivers, professionals to understand that it's not willful disobedience as it looks, but it's really a child or adolescent who's struggling with an invisible brain injury. And no matter how bright they can come off and appear, there are certain things in their brains that just don't work well. So helping all of us to kind of be able to reframe and come from that perspective. And then we'll dig a little bit into the strategies. It won't be a long enough time where I can get really in depth into the strategies, of how to parent these kids a bit differently, but I'll give some of those foundational things to help parents dig deeper and find that training and support that they need for that. But you're totally right. Like the supports and resources for this in every state are very minimal. And I mean, there is an FASD Respect Act. That's some federal legislation that if anybody wants to dig into, it's the things right now that we should be contacting legislators about. It's called the FASD Respect Act. So look more into that.
Great information. I appreciate it. So the last thing I want to ask you is now, why would this benefit everyone? I think I know why I feel it would benefit, because you may not have this or have to deal with this, or how does this benefit everybody?
Well, so here's the thing is, you might not have a child right now that you're caring for that has this, but if you're doing foster care, you might eventually. And again, 86.5% of the time in foster and adoptive children, this diagnosis is missed. And what happens is we're using strategies that are ineffective if they are struggling with this invisible brain injury, and we're using consequence-based, punitive-based, other type of strategies. It causes friction, and it just makes it challenging within the family unit. And then it also keeps our kids at a heightened state of anxiety, so that they're not able to learn maybe some of the academics that we know they're capable of, or even to make some of the connections of the life lessons that we're trying to teach them within family systems, because they're always kind of in this heightened state of anxiety because things just aren't working and we're not using the right approaches. So there's that you might possibly have a kid who's probably just not diagnosed, because the diagnosis is complicated and hard to get if you don't have confirmation of exposure, which often we don't. But even if you can't get this diagnosis, but you suspect it, learning about it and sharing that information with other people in that child's life will make an impact. It's not going to go on an IEP or a 504, but it can be something we share with that team. So, but the other thing is I can guarantee you every single person has somebody in their life who has an FASD. It's probably likely undiagnosed, right? Like I can sit and realize I have family members that have this that are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed with other things, kids in your neighborhood, people in your neighborhood, people you work with, right? Like there's you'll once you start to learn more about this, you kind of like see it all over. You see it in every single newscast, even though it's almost always undiagnosed. So it's just something that's important to know because it will help us just be fetal alcohol is a form of trauma. It's in utero trauma. And all of us adoptive foster families and kinship families need to be more trauma informed and trauma responsive. And this is just one more thing that will help families, and professionals just kind of bring their knowledge level to a higher level.